KPMG PNG. Please make him welcome, Mr. Matt Dree.
So this is my bio, which is lengthy. I've been in the industry for about 20 years, but this sums up sort of who I am and what I do. And what I'm going to talk about today is the two biggest incident types that we see, performing digital forensics and incident response, about incidents that are affecting PNG specifically, and then about some of the innovation that adversaries are conducting as well as us as defenders. So in terms of notable incidents, I did some searching when I spoke to Andrew about this presentation and wanted to figure out what sort of attacks, or how many attacks are we seeing in PNG. And what I found that there's actually very little information out there. I had to really dig into the deep web to find some things that weren't even documented on public sites. Some of those are some telecommunications providers that were compromised in December 2022, as well as a government department and a workforce management organisation in June last year. There are a couple of others, one that a lot of people would remember that impacted the Department of Finance in October 2021. But what this tells me is not that PNG is doing a great job, it just tells me that people aren't reporting incidents, because if you're on the internet, you are being targeted. It's impacting everybody. The other thing that we're seeing is that there's lots of credentials that are for sale on marketplaces. So if you're using a Chromium-based browser, which is Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome, and you like to install game cheats or cracked software, or you don't really want to pay for things and you're installing that software, it often comes bundled with stealer malware. And that malware, what it does is when you log into a website, sometimes you enter your username and password and it says, do you want to save your password? And that's convenient. And you're actually encouraged to do that in a lot of advertising now, to actually save your credentials in the browser. What this stealer malware does is it collects all those credentials, packages them up, and then advertises them for sale on marketplaces. So I did a bit of a search sort of the past 30 days across stealer logs to see what sort of credentials I could find that were relevant to PNG, and you can see a whole bunch of brands up there. So these are all valid credentials that I could buy for about $10 and then use them to access these sorts of systems. This is what a stealer log looks like. So this is a popular marketplace called Russian Market. It's on the dark web. And what you can see on the left, the source of the connection was from Papua New Guinea, and then you can see a large list of links. So I don't expect you to see all those, but what I searched for was show me in the last 30 days anything that matches .com.pg or .gov.pg, and then I just grabbed a sample. I found this one to be quite interesting because down the bottom, on the right, there's like a directory listing, and for some reason, usually they obfuscate anything that you could use to identify the actual victim, but in this instance, that wasn't the case. And you can see there's a username in the directory listing under users. It's Kulu Alu. So I did a bit of internet search to figure out who that was, and I basically just searched for the name plus PNG. And it looks like Kulu's an engineer at the PNG Radio Telecom and Technical Authority, so PengTel. I tried reaching out through LinkedIn, but I didn't get a response. So if anyone knows Kulu, tell them to reach out and I can let them know this has happened. So the two biggest risks that we're seeing facing organisations, there's two major threats. One's called ransomware, and the other one's called business email compromise, abbreviated as BEC. These sorts of attacks are just consistently on the rise, as you can see from these charts. The top left being ransomware, and the bottom right being business email compromise. The way that they get in is for ransomware, they typically compromise an external service like a management interface or a VPN, or perhaps they buy credentials like we saw before, and they use that to facilitate initial access into a network. And I'm going to go into some detail about how that works. And then the other one, business email compromise, generally occurs through phishing. So receiving a phishing email. And I'll tell you how that works in more detail. In terms of ransomware, the reason it's such a big threat is because the threat actors are getting paid. There's a group who I've highlighted the top right there who recently impacted a casino in Las Vegas, and they crippled the whole organization. There was so much impact that they decided to pay the ransom, which initially was 30 million USD. They settled for half of that, so they got approximately $15 million US payout. So if you think about buying credentials for about $10 and then conducting an operation like that, that's a pretty good payday. When it comes to business email compromise, it's a lower level of sophistication. What they're doing there is they're just sort of accessing somebody's mailbox, they'll forge an invoice, something like that, and generally the payout is about 64,000 Australian dollars. That's according to the Australian Cybersecurity Centre from last year. So BEC. So I thought I'll try and illustrate how this works so that you can have a think about how you would defend against this and how you would respond. So Office 365 as an example, maybe using Google Workspace, you receive an email, it's a phishing email, and in this instance it's a fake voicemail notification. So you receive this luring looking email, oh here's a voicemail, I really want to listen, I really want to hear it. So it could look something like that. Obviously you click on the link. Once you click on the link, you're presented with a login prompt. Oh, I need to log on in order to get that voicemail to listen to it. So you provide your username and password, that goes straight to the threat actor. At that point, they try and log on. Then you have multi-factor authentication. So multi-factor authentication should prevent that user from being compromised because they have to accept an SMS code or a voice call or an authenticator app. You can see here there's a bunch of options. So the threat actor has these options and they're smart enough to know that, say 9 a.m., 8 a.m. when people start their workday, they generally receive a lot of these notifications. And so what they do is they select phone call. So they log in at 9 a.m., they select phone call, the victim receives the phone call, they expect the phone call because they're logging on, and they accept it. And then the threat actor's now in that mailbox. There's lots of other ways to bypass multi-factor authentication, by the way. That's just one example. So they're in the mailbox, then what do? They add an MFA factor so that they can get ongoing access. So they need to make sure that they can get back in if something happens. They then start searching that mailbox for sensitive information like credit card numbers, passports, anything sensitive. And then they install other applications so that they can get back in if you identify them and there's a password reset. So that's by installing an application on the mailbox. And some of those applications are designed to pull out everything from the mailbox, so do a full dump, a full export. Then they'll start searching for things like invoices and who accounts payable are. And then they'll implement rules on the the victim's mailbox to hide communications. So they find an invoice, they forge the invoice, they change the account number, they send it to accounts payable, and then they say, you need to pay this right now. They put some urgency on it. Accounts payable say, hey, what's going on? We don't know this account number. They reply back to the victim. The threat actors actually implemented mailbox rules, so the real victim doesn't see the email. It's going into a separate place that they can see, the threat actor can see, and they reply back, you know, this is all good. Definitely pay the invoice, and then the invoice gets paid. So at that point, if you have an incident like this, these are the sorts of things you need to be thinking about. You need an incident response plan. You don't want to wing it. You may need to engage some external providers, people that do this sort of work all the time, so incident response investigators, as well as if you have general counsel, like a lawyer that you can talk to, they're often not that familiar with this sort of work, so it helps to have a specialist breach lawyer. You want to contact the bank, obviously, you want to try and stop the payment. If you have cyber insurance, you want to contact your insurer. You want to remove that OAuth application because that gives them access even after you think you contained it and change the password for the victim. You want to change passwords, kill the sessions, obviously do an investigation, and then there's a whole bunch of data that the threat actor stole. So you need to know what's there because who knows how that could be used to extort you in the future. And then if it's relevant, say there's a whole bunch of sensitive information that's been taken, you may need to notify the people that have been impacted. Ransomware. So I thought with this one, a lot of attacks with ransomware are occurring now. They're attacking management interfaces. So I thought I'd do a scan across PNG for Cisco routers that had the web management interface exposed, because there was a recent vulnerability that you could remotely use to exploit these routers and get access. So I did a scan and I found 94 hosts. So then I scanned each one of those hosts and I found one of them actually already had a backdoor on it. So I notified that company and said, hey, you've got a backdoor on your router. And so hopefully that's been remediated. There might be some people in this room who've actually responded to that. But this is how they get in. So they identify some sort of external management interface. Could be a VPN, could be anything that's vulnerable that's internet facing. They find the bug, they exploit it. They then use that to pivot to the internal network. And so they're scanning the internal network, looking to see what's there. At that point, they find that you've got a whole bunch of documentation or sensitive data. They steal it all. They then deploy ransomware. So note this has occurred after the data has been stolen, because if you detected them deploying the ransomware, you might have some antivirus product or some solution in place, and it detects the ransomware. They've already got the data, so they'll extort you anyway. That's their game plan. They'll then send you a copy of that data, like a sample, and say, hey, we've got a sample of your data, this is what we have. They'll demand a ransom payment. At that point, you need to invoke your incident response plan. Again, you want to talk to breach lawyers. This could involve things like negotiation with a threat actor. You want to know what they have so you can understand what your exposure is. You want to preserve the evidence, so you don't want to start restoration straight away. You really need to understand what your exposure is first so that you can, if there's any sort of regulation you have to comply with. I know that here there isn't any mandatory breach notification, but there is privacy law, and I assume things are going to change soon around that. You want to contact your insurer. You want to perform any mandatory notifications that you have to do. So when you're talking with your legal team, you might need to notify third parties. There's things in your contracts. You need to understand what they are. You need to determine how the threat actor got in. So that's the root cause and the extent of the breach. So where else are they in the environment? Did they deploy backdoors? Can they get back in? You want to make sure that they can't. You then need to review everything that they stole. It's very common now to see organizations putting all of their data into data lakes, and then those data lakes get compromised because people are doing development in them. And then at that point, there's a lot of unstructured data and people don't really know what's there. That's a common theme that we're seeing at the moment. So you need to go through and review all that data. You then need to be prepared to notify end victims or end users, your customers. And if you're doing that, you might start receiving a whole bunch of support calls. You know, what data is exposed? How have I been impacted? Your service desk calls will just ramp up exponentially. So you need to be prepared for that. And you need to make sure that you're crafting communications to the media as well as your end customers to be clear and accurate, as well as not getting yourself in a situation to answer some very difficult questions. Finally, once you've done all that, you want to conduct a post-incident review and you want to learn from it and implement the remediation and all the learnings from that incident. So how do we improve? So there's a concept called dwell time. I think it was coined by CrowdStrike. What it is when a threat actor gets into the environment, that's initial access. Then they're going to do a data breach, they're going to steal some data. Then you will detect it, and then you evict the actor. So between initial access to kicking them out of the network, actually containing, that's the dwell time. And so, of course, you want to prevent an incident as well as you can so that you don't have any initial access, but threat actors are buying credentials, they look like you're legitimate administrators, they're performing social engineering, they're getting in. You want to detect them as soon as possible. And so you'll hear there's a whole bunch of services around this sort of work, so I thought I'd just explain what some of that is so that you can understand how it impacts dwell time. So you'll hear things called an incident response retainer. And what that is just having a team like mine on standby to help you when an incident occurs. So as soon as you detect it, you contact your provider, they come in, they help you do the forensics and the incident response. There's also proactive services there, so they can help you to implement some of those preventative controls and prepare to create that incident response plan, those playbooks. Then there's compromise assessments or threat hunting, and that's where you're deploying technology, you're searching the dark web, you're understanding what the threats are that impact that specific organisation or your organisation, and helping to build a whole bunch of recommendations around implementing remediation or controls to help prevent an incident. So it's applying the lessons that you learn from all the incident response investigations that you do and applying that intelligence to an organisation. So it's a proactive service. And then really the best is detection engineering. And so that's where you're pulling in all your log sources, you're understanding the different threats that exist, you're learning from your intrusions, and you're building detections to detect them early on in that attack lifecycle, after initial access or even before initial access is ideal. And then going to the next step is, once you have confidence that your detections are really good, they're not generating false positives, it's implementing automated containment measures so that the attack just can't progress. So we've been talking about innovation a fair bit, and I thought I'd talk a bit about innovation from adversaries. So KYC, which is Know Your Customer, is the sort of verification that you do in order to get a bank account. And there's been a lot of research and work done with generative AI to take sampling of people's voices or videos, like streaming or images, and then training that to impersonate somebody. So creating fake identities, impersonating people, bypassing KYC verification. So this is what's coming. There's continued external management interfaces that are being compromised. So I talked about that Cisco vulnerability earlier, where I identified 94 management interfaces that were internet accessible. They have no reason to be internet accessible. It's just no good reason to have that sort of thing out there. Those things are getting compromised all the time. So VPNs, anything with a login prompt, anything with a web service, anything that's basically exposed to the internet is getting targeted. Aggressive social engineering. So there's some groups now using information that they obtain from data breaches, finding out who people are, what their relationships are, where they live, and then contacting them and saying, give me your login, give me your password. If you don't, I'm going to come to your house and shoot it down. Threat actors are also leveraging DevOps. So like we're leveraging technology to automate our processes. They're doing the same thing. What that means is that from initial access to data breach, they're getting that down to less than an hour now. So they'll come in, they'll leverage all their automation to figure out where everything is, and then they rip all your data out of your environment. So it just means that we need to get really fast at detecting and responding. So we need to be aggressive with our containment policies and our automation. Data lakes are being compromised. So as everybody's building machine learning and using AI, we're putting all of our data into these stores, and development's being done, but it's not being done securely, or people are forgetting to turn things off, and they're getting compromised. And that's all of your data. So we need to be really careful about what we're storing, who has access to it. People only have access to the fields or columns that they need to have access to. And we're continuing to see supply chain attacks. So this is where you have your service provider, your telecommunications companies, they're being hacked, and then their access, their management access into your environment is being leveraged to get into your network. So they're absolutely the best place for these adversaries to target because of the amount of access that they have. And when they're logging in, it's no one bats an eyelid. And we're also seeing a lot of disinformation and misinformation. So people are living in their bubbles now, their social media bubbles, and adversaries are infiltrating those groups and creating propaganda and influencing people's opinions, elections, etc. So I know I've got another workshop after this, and here's a bit of a taster. This is using, rather than relying on getting visibility across your whole environment, which is really hard, and building detection capability, what this is creating these irresistible lures, like fake files, fake documents, that are things that threat actors like to look for once they compromise your environment. So if you think about business email compromise, They start searching, they compromise your mailbox, they'll start searching for things like passwords or credit card numbers. You could create fake emails, and then when an adversary searches for your mailbox and opens that document, it generates an alert. And that's a really high confidence signal, enabling you to implement some sort of automated response and contain that incident. And with that, I'll say thank you.